It's about basically recognizing patterns in process and learning how to work with those patterns in a variety of different ways to bring about the outcomes that you want. It ought to increase your adaptiveness, increase your variety, and being able to bring about the outcomes you want in everyday life, in the circumstances you find yourself in. Hey, how's it going? This is James Tripp. I have a video for you, which is, I'm slightly embarrassed to put this out in the world. It's actually me ranting about something. It's me ranting about NLP and how I think that people get the wrong end of the stick about what it's about and what NLP is really about. Now, this video got recorded. It was a conversation between myself and Alex Crow, who I used to do the Tripp and Crow podcast with. We may start that up at some point in the not too distant future. But we were prepping to do an episode about something completely different. And this topic just kind of came up and we got into an informal conversation. I was not planning for this to go out in the world. So I was not in my usual kind of presenter mode or presenter state. I'm just in a conversation with Alex. And when I look at it back, I think that I seem a bit testy, a bit ranty, and it's not the me that I necessarily would choose to put out there in the world. But Alex convinced me that this was worth putting out in the world because it, in his view, helps to correct a lot of very deep misunderstandings about NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming, what it's capable of, why it's of value, why it's of benefit. And I do think in my unguarded rant mode that I have got that across with some reasonably good examples. So I want to share it here. It has been out about 6 months ago or so on the Tripp and Crow podcast, but the people here on this channel haven't had the chance to see it. I'm dropping it here in part because I'm running an NLP or adaptive NLP intensive 5 days in February in Edinburgh, which is going to be the 12th to the 16th. You'll find a link somewhere in the About section or something where you can get more details on that if you're interested. But if you're just curious about NLP, what it can help you to achieve, what it really is about as a tool for developing personal flexibility, or what I like to call adaptiveness, watch on. And if you like what you see, please do give it a thumbs up. And yeah, nothing else to say. Let's dive in. It's about basically recognizing patterns in process and learning how to work with those patterns in a variety of different ways to bring about the outcomes that you want. That's what NLP is about. It ought to increase your adaptiveness, increase your variety, and being able to bring about the outcomes you want in everyday life, in the circumstances you find yourself in. That's what it's primarily about. As Bandler has said, NLP is an attitude and a methodology that leaves behind it a trail of techniques. Many people think that trail of techniques is NLP, and it's not. It's what gets left behind, right? Now, those techniques have some value in the context of an NLP training, but you have to understand the value of them and what you're trying to do with them, because the value is not that people learn the techniques. The value of those techniques is it takes an explorer through a syntax of moving their mind in a particular way, right? From which they can then draw generalizations, which will upgrade the flexibility and the variety in their own cognitive processing. That's the point of it, right? They're not even change work techniques, right? This is the thing. People miss this all the time. They go, perceptual positions, that's a change work technique. No, it's not. It's an NLP training exercise for inculcating certain patterns of thinking into somebody that they can make use of in their life, right? That's the thing.
I think that's the case with a lot of the trainings maybe nowadays. It's only after speaking to you for an extended period of time that I realized actually there's a different way of looking at NLP, and it's about a mindset, a framework, a way of looking at things rather than just an aggregation of techniques, because that's kind of how I learned it as well.
Right. It is not an aggregation of techniques. It's not about techniques. It's about adaptiveness and choice. It's about the ability to create in the moment. It's about developing requisite variety. This is an important idea in NLP. Requisite variety in behavioral choices that enable you to bring about the outcomes that you want. Right?
Yeah.
Now, primarily, those behavioral choices are at the level of communication and cognition, right? So
Yeah.
you want to develop greater flexibility in, greater variety of, a greater repertoire, adaptive repertoire in your communication skills, and a greater adaptive repertoire in your thinking and processing skills. That's the primary thing.
Yeah.
And knowing how to use that to bring about outcomes, and knowing how to run adaptive feedback loops like totes to bring about the outcomes you want. That's NLP, right?
Yeah.
But it is not these things. It is not visual squash. It is not change personal history. It is not swish patterns. It is not none of those things.
The difficult part is like if you go on YouTube and you search NLP, some of the top YouTube channels, all they're doing is they're showing different techniques and different sort of visual squashes and explaining them and showing the right ways and the wrong ways of doing them and showing how to apply them with clients. So it's like, where do you even go to find to learn this other way?
I think like it's difficult to know where to go. I think John Grinder knows what it's about and understands it, as does probably Richard Bandler, undoubtedly. But I think that they've both sort of given up and just gone, screw it. Like, what can I do about all those people out there that are just, they think they get it, but they don't. Right? Like, in a sense, people who think that those techniques are NLP are picking up the residue that's left behind and thinking that that's the main engine, and it's not.
Yeah.
And I would still maintain a lot of those, some of those original processes, they were there to help people develop adaptiveness in their thinking and their cognition. But then people have thought that instead of that, they're actually a change work process that does something magical and reprograms somebody. That's not what they are. And then they've gone, oh, I get it. So if I make more things like that and call them change work processes, then I'm developing NLP. No, you're not. Right? Because for a start, some of the things you develop aren't actually aligned with the underlying principles of philosophy. Right? And if you do something like change personal history, you're moving your mind through a series of steps which shift perspective and create a new kind of cognitive pathway that gives you a set of choices in how you think about the world unconsciously in everyday life. These NLP patterns, they're more like learning chess openings, right? If you're learning chess, you'll learn a series of different openings because each one of those openings will teach you something different about chess, right? The idea is you learn the opening, it develops you, you move on to another opening. That develops you further. You move on to another opening. Each one develops your chess consciousness, your chess vision, these sorts of things. The point isn't to get stuck in the openings and think that those openings are chess. They're not, right? It's exactly the same with NLP. The point of those NLP processes is not to get good at running those NLP processes. The point is to take you through a series of mental maneuvers. So it's the person being led through who's actually learning the NLP, not the person who's leading them through. Although you can apply NLP to good facilitation as well, which is where it gets confusing. Because you can, deploy your communication skills to be a good guide for somebody through that process.
I think that's where the issue comes in, because most of these courses are taught with that scope, that you learn NLP to apply it in therapy work or in coaching work. Right.
I think that is the confusion. I know NLP was modeled from therapy work, but none of those patterns were the therapeutic patterns modeled. The people being modeled originally, they didn't use techniques. They used their intuition and their communication skills. So the point of NLP was to model out, or to create models that could teach people the communication skills of these people and help them build similar intuitions. Not so they would just get bound to step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, which none of those change work geniuses ever used. So I think there's a terrible misunderstanding occurring. Right now, what typically happens a lot of the time in NLP practitioner trainings is people go, oh no, I'm the facilitator here and I have to be good and I have to have good NLP skills and be showing good NLP skills, and this is all about my skills and all of this. It's like, no, it's not. Right? Everybody thinks it's about the guide role, the facilitator role. That's what people think. It's not. It's about the explorer role first and foremost. So most people go in with the wrong idea. That's something that you fix in the framing. right? That's the important thing. It's the explorer role is primary, not the guide role.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in some senses, the explorer and the observer roles are the most important roles, and the guide role is the least important role. But everyone thinks the guide role is the most important role because that's the whole point of it, is to develop these amazing skills for facilitation and moving minds and all of this, which you can do and you can develop, but that is not the business of beginners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
I didn't have the distinction in my mind. I've heard you speak about the differences of NLP as a technique and NLP as a mindset or a way of looking at things. And there was no point where that distinction was actually, I was conscious of it. Now I see how my own training was actually very much focused just on techniques, and I don't think I took anything in regards to like a different way of looking at things.
Right. I mean, if you can't use NLP in the world, in every communication, in every conversation, you haven't got any of it. You know, if it only
Yeah,
exists in a bunch of special techniques that you do in a really artificial context, that's not it.
that's what I thought it was. I thought it was about change work or self, like either helping somebody with it or helping yourself with these techniques. I didn't think there was
No,
anything beyond that.
it's about basically recognizing patterns in process and learning how to work with those patterns in a variety of different ways to bring about the outcomes that you want. That's what NLP is about.
Mm,
Right. And when I say patterns in process, that's behavioral process, communication process, thought process, right? Multi-level communication. So you're observing, you're able to witness patterns, you're able to see them unfolding. You start to get like a pattern vision and a process-based vision
mm-hmm,
rather than a kind of like content-based vision.
mm-hmm.
So you're always looking at the flow of any communication or any thought line or whatever it will be, and looking at where the choice points are, where they can be influenced, where things can be nudged and steered in different directions. And obviously, you want an appropriate toolkit to do that with enough tools and enough options in. And this is the concept of requisite variety that's absolutely huge in NLP, one of the presuppositions. The element with the greatest degree of flexibility in the system will be the governing element within that system. Right? You want to be the one with the greatest degree of flexibility. And you want to be able to run those tote loops, right? This is what I want to create. Where are we at right now? What needs to happen? I'll nudge this way. Are we closer? Are we further away? So you want to have in the tote loop, test, operate, test, exit, the operate operations. You want to have requisite variety, i.e. enough variety in your choices in those operations to be able to bring about the outcome that you want. Right? So it's all about building requisite variety. It's all about being able to pay attention in terms of pattern and sequence and these kinds of things, primarily. There's also spotting pattern and structure, which is the semantic level more than the syntactic level, but they're related.
What would be some examples of requisite variety? Like what sort of a situation and what spectrum of what techniques you would have or behaviors you could deploy or
it's behaviors, right? I mean, I told you about Amy with the vaccinations. Did I tell you about Amy with the vaccinations?
I'm not sure.
Okay, so maybe not. Maybe it was since we got back. But like basically, Amy had two vaccinations to get. Lois as well. Like one of them was meningitis, one of them was just a tetanus update, right? And they were having them done at school. Lois has left the school, but she was booked for the things, so she went in and had it because they had the doses there for her. So now Amy, she tends to sort of create stuff in her mind and freak out and stuff like this. So I was pretty sure she was going to freak out at some point, but she was all right when I drove her into school. I sat in the car because I was going to take Lois afterwards. And then, of course, I got the text from Lois saying, I've had mine done. Amy's having a meltdown and won't do it. Right. So I jumped out the car, jogged into the office and went in. And there's the two NHS nurses, and Amy's crying and her eye accessing's like down here. And so, tote loop. I need an outcome, right? My outcome is number one, Amy gets the shots. Number two, she has an experience of getting the shots that blows out the generalizations that are creating the current problem trance that's having her stop getting the shots, i.e. the meltdown, let's call it, right?
Which she has an experience. The other outcome is her having an experience that makes that okay.
Yeah, that serves as a counterexample for her fears, basically.
To alleviate
Right.
the fear so she doesn't have any issues with shots.
Yes, exactly. So I want this to be an experience that feeds forward into her actually, changing her beliefs about herself and about shots and all of this kind of thing, right? So this is my sort of dual outcome that I'm going in with. This outcome, by the way, is selected outside of consciousness. And it's selected outside of consciousness only because of my trained intuitions, right? That's my point about NLP training intuition. So it's not about going, oh, what do I want to have happen here? Sometimes you can do that, but after you've trained the intuition, you'll do it outside of consciousness. You select well-formed outcomes outside of consciousness, not through going through a well-formed outcome selection process. Right. So again, this is about like inculcating habits of mind and these sorts of things that create useful engagements.
Wouldn't you have that sort of unconscious selection of those two things, even if you didn't have NLP training?
Probably not. Because
What
I
would
wouldn't
your
because I wouldn't necessarily have picked positively framed outcomes. I wouldn't have known how to run a tote loop. I'd have just gone, oh, this is terrible. Like I just need to persuade Amy to have the shots, maybe, or maybe like I would
Oh, I
lose
see.
myself.
Maybe the second part of the outcome you wouldn't have considered. You would still get the first outcome of getting her to get the shots,
Yeah,
but you wouldn't be taking into consideration, let's let her have a good experience.
right. So I would have poor ecology around it for a start, and I might have actually created a situation that increased the likelihood of her having problems and anxiety and blocks in the future. Right. So I wouldn't be able to take an ecological view and select a well-formed outcome. And one of the criteria of a well-formed outcome is that it's ecological, that it serves like congruent, aligned requirements, right? And I might not even had a well-formed outcome. I might have thought, oh, I've gone and going, I want to stop Amy freaking out.
Yeah.
Right. That's not a well-formed outcome because it's an away from outcome.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Or like, how do I stop her feeling sad? I might have like, got caught up in like a content organization. Like she is sad. And that's not, so now we're moving into the realm of content rather than process. Right. I don't want her to feel bad. It's like, that's not a very well-formed outcome by NLP criteria. Right. So basically I've got my outcome so I can run a tote loop. Test, operate, test, exit. I know my exit point is she gets the shots and she has an experience of getting the shots that it's okay. Actually, that was no big deal. That's kind of what I want, right? So I went in and I calibrate her state, first of all. First move, calibrate. What does the current state look like? Again, outside of consciousness, because it's an intuition now. Most people don't calibrate state. They're not really thinking on that level. They might be up in their head going, oh no, she's feeling sad. I'd feel terrible if I felt sad like her. And, whatever it will be, none of it's useful. So looking at that situation, I'm like, right, what needs to happen? So first thing, I can't remember what was my first maneuver. I can't remember all of my maneuvers because they're all unconscious. I think it was probably just to go in and go, hey, Amy, go for a break state. Go, you don't look like you're feeling good. And what I did is I moved over to the opposite side of her. She was eye-accessing down there to draw her attention up to look at me. Right? Because I know if I change her eye-accessing, she can't do the state. So one of the things I'm doing is I'm keeping her attention up here. So I'm going for a non-verbal, hey, right? And she's looked up, she's going, I said, you don't look like you're having a good time. So I'm pacing her by saying you don't look like you're having a good time, but I'm seeding having a good time, right? And she's kind of gone, oh. So for a second, she's coming out, then she's gone back in. Right? So that was my first operation. Test that operation. It didn't work. It didn't get me what I wanted, right? If what you're doing isn't working, do something different. So I've got to change now. I need to use gambit number 2. so gambit number 2 was, what was it? I can't remember. It was just probably some conversational hypnosis language pattern or something like that. It didn't land. Whatever it was, gambit number 2 didn't work. Second miss, right? So keep flowing. Then she said to me, can't I just have it next year? She said, right? So NLP principle, I want to utilize this. I do not want to block it. I do not want to reject it. If I didn't know this principle, I might have gone, no, you can't. You've got to have it now. That's just blocking it, right? So I want to take and create with this offer, utilization. She says, can't I just have it next year? I said, well, I guess you could, or you could look forward to next year where you can just go, oh, thank goodness I had it last year and I'm free now, right? So I see her y-axis go up and she's processing this and she's like, oh. And then I could see she was in a different state, but she was about to collapse back into the previous state. So I headed her off at that point. I thought double bind, another classic NLP choice. I said, let me ask you this though, because you could have it next year, but like if you had the choice, would you prefer to just get both of them done now? So next year you can go, oh, thank goodness that's passed now. And wasn't that actually okay? Or would you prefer instead to just have one shot done now? And then, you could decide about the other one. So would you prefer 2 or 1? Double bind, right? And she's gone, well, I'd rather just have 1. I'm like, okay, that's cool. You can just have 1. And then I turned and I said, so which one's easiest? Right. And I'm like, which one's easiest? Presupposition. They're both easy. Which one's easiest? I say to the NHS nurse types. They're like, well, we could do that. I'm like, you're not getting my point. I don't really want to know. Just play the fucking game. But, they went with a bit more information I want. I said, oh, well, just go with that one. Because I didn't care which one we went with. Because I'm banking on the fact that once she's had 1, she'll have 2. Because my major aim at that point was to get movement happening. I wanted her out of the state and into a different movement track. Right. So once she'd had 1, I was absolutely sure she'd have had 2. And I said, we'd do 1. If it's really, really easy and just like, hey, man, that's no big deal. It's totally comfortable. The next one will be done. You won't even know it. Right. So she went up. She's like, oh, okay. And then I knew the y-axis direction that she needed to go in to sustain a problem. So I stayed right up in a point up here. And I'm like, hey, Amy. And I started to like rub her on the back of the shoulder. I said, the thing is, this has already happened. You don't even know it yet. Right? And she's like, what? I said, you've done it, right? And she'd done it on the other side. I said, so it's done. It's done. Actually, look over here. The woman's gone around the other side and gone, whip, popped it in. Both done. She said, oh, your arms will be a bit heavy. I said, did that just happen? We're done? Oh. Right?
Reinforcing the fact that it was a good experience and easy.
Yeah, because I'm like, oh, that's a surprise. It's easy. So I want to pantomime that. I want that in my nonverbal communication. Right? She's done. I'm like, how easy was that? So all of that took 2-3 minutes from me walking in. That's NLP, not like, okay, Amy, so what's your outcome here? Well, okay, we're going to mark out some points on the floor. I just see that part of you in one hand that's like, that's not going to work because it's a bad fit for the context.
Yeah.
Right. NLP, the idea is to be able to deploy things in a variety of different contexts. If you've just got these processes, well, that's not going to work in a context like that.
No, of course not. But that's how it's taught. That was a really good example, actually, to demonstrate how you can use it casually in normal, every day-to-day life.
And to me, that is the place I enjoy doing it the most and using it the most because no one's defenses are up. In a formal change work context, people know that you're at work, right? Now, if the client really wants to make the change fully and congruently, that's not a big deal. But if they've got objections, parts of them object or whatever, they're not congruent in wanting to change. The fact that they know you're working tips them off and empowers their defense of change. But if you're just deploying stuff as and when you go, now it might be in that instance because I want to create a state shift and a different reference experience for my daughter. But sometimes it might be just that I want to. I mean, I mentioned like dealing with unspecified person. I think that was one I told you about.
Yeah.
Like, she had a pattern that she wanted to run. That was part of her strategy for manipulation, and I just wanted to make sure she couldn't run it. That was it. It's like, I'm going to disrupt your strategy and not let you have closure on that, right? So again, that's like a different thing. I'm not trying to do some change work with her, although ultimately across time, if I did that with her over and over, her creative unconscious, if you want to call it that, might start to develop new choices of behavior that might be more healthy and useful.
Because you're disrupting, you're not letting it close.
Yeah. Because her brain's going to go, oh, this doesn't work here. Need to create something different. So it's going to depend whether you want to do sort of change work or just influence. So in that instance, I wanted to influence Amy to get that, but I also wanted to create the conditions whereby some change could unfold from it as well. If I just wanted to get her to do it and I didn't care about anything beyond that moment, I could have deployed other choices still.
Is the requirement of the second outcome as well as the first one that dictated the choice of what you did?
Yeah, which is ecology. So like in a well-formed outcome, there's always like ecology. It's like, what else do you want this to achieve? What do you want this to avoid? These sorts of things. Having a generative, wholesome outcome that's likely to create more good things rather than have unforeseen negative consequences.